So thank you for being here. Thank you for joining this session. So today we're going to talk about the potential, the future potential of the open source concept, everything around that. So let me introduce myself before that. My name is Masaru Ikeda. I'm the co-founder and the blogger of The Bleach, which is an online publication basically covering what's happening in the startup community in English and Japanese. So today we have two awesome people from the US. You guys are flying over from the US, right?
Yep.
So you're still jet lag, or how do you feel?
No, I don't do jet lag.
Maybe a little bit.
Yeah.
How is it so far?
Good. Yeah.
Yeah, really good.
So this is the first time here for Lights, you guys?
No, I spoke at Rise last year. Yep. So,
How about you?
This is my first time at Rise, yeah.
Oh, that's good. That's good. So Nico is from the Linux Foundation, and Chris is from js Foundation. So would you like to introduce yourself and what do you do? What's your interest in kind of thing? So let me start with Nico.
Yeah. So I'm the Chief Technology Officer at the Linux Foundation. That doesn't mean that I get to write Linux. The Linux Foundation is a non-profit organization that supports about 40 different open source projects, major projects that you've heard of. Of course, the Linux kernel is the most famous of those, but many of the key components of the internet developed in an open source model, and we support a lot of those most important projects. And my role there is primarily around trying to drive improvements in the security and quality of open source software and make it more of a tool for businesses to build upon.
So your job is probably like helping the enterprise user to, how do you say, adapt their interaction into their solution infrastructure, some kind of things, right? Okay, thank you very much. So next is Chris from JS Foundation. So I heard that the JS Foundation is, they used to be called jQuery Foundation.
Right.
So what happened to them? What happened to, why the name has been changed?
Sure. So yeah, like you said, we're now the JS Foundation. We support currently 24 open source JavaScript projects. The reason for the name change was mostly because we had been supporting a number of JavaScript projects other than jQuery for years. And it just made sense to kind of expand that scope, that vision, and expand it more publicly in just how people refer to us, so they understand that we are here to support all of open source JavaScript and kind of become that center of gravity for the JavaScript ecosystem.
So what's your role in the organization?
So I'm the executive director, so I sort of run the business side, so manage relationships with our members, member organizations, talk to new projects that may be looking for support, things like that.
And bring a bunch of money from the enterprise to your foundation, or raising money from investors, not investor maybe, right? How do you make money through the?
So yeah, we're a nonprofit, but we are supported through a membership model. So organizations join the foundation and pay a membership fee to support our operations and the projects that we support.
Okay, thank you. So both of you know very well each other, right? Or have you ever worked together, or?
Yeah.
Very little. I mean, we work. We both report to the same boss, I guess, ultimately.
Right.
But
I guess that's the piece that I left out is actually the JS Foundation is now a Linux Foundation project. So technically we work together, running completely different things.
That's good to hear. So in my understanding, both of you guys are very familiar with open source society, open source community, actually. But Nico is more like always infrastructure side, and then Chris is more like kind of the application development or kind of framework, those kind of things, right?
Sure.
So from each of you, could you tell us what's the latest trend? What's the trend in your space right now?
well, I think that over the last few years, we've seen a major shift in the way that businesses are making use of open source software. There have always been a few startups that have been involved in open source. Many more innovative startups make use of open source. There have been a handful of very successful companies specifically in the open source space, people like Red Hat and SUSE. But I think what's really happened over the last few years is that increasingly large chunks of the stack that people build enterprises on is becoming open source. So we're seeing the open source hypervisors taking over big chunks of VMware's business. We're seeing the open source kernels like Linux taking over Microsoft's business. We're seeing the open source web server platforms taking over from Sun's business. And so more and more of the stack that we build on is open source.
So as you mentioned, the people, especially someone like network administrators or system administrators, those kind of guys in the big enterprise, unlikely to use the kind of rely on the kind of open source based servers or infrastructure a decade ago or 3 decades ago kind of things. But what do you think? What was the turning point in terms of the change in their mindset into to adopt more open source based infrastructure into their facility or environment?
I think there's 2 pieces to this. One is if you buy a product from a vendor and it doesn't do what you want it to do, you have to lobby the vendor, you have to complain to the product manager, they want you to sign up to another contract in order to buy the latest version so that you get the new feature. Whereas if you have an open source product and it doesn't do what you want, you just fix it. And so the pace of innovation and the pace of with which you can make your infrastructure do what you want it to do, what you need it to do. It's much, much quicker when you're building on open source. And I think that combined with the fact that open source is no longer being developed by, guys sitting in their mother's basement. It's now being developed by hardcore software engineers working for major corporations because people like Google and IBM and Microsoft are all building on open source themselves, and they're all contributing back to these projects.
So there used to be no function like an open online update or online bug fix or those kind of function that ended maybe many years ago, maybe. But now it's every company has a kind of function, right? So it's going to be a great thing for open source-based infrastructure, right? Is it?
Certainly, the ability to ensure that you're running the most up-to-date version of software is much easier. Platforms like most of the JavaScript platforms and Node.js on the server side all have package managers which make it very easy to not just keep up to date on the piece that you wanted to install, but all of the components that you depend on, that whole dependency graph is handled for you. So certainly the ability to easily install and configure and deploy open source has got a lot better in the last decade or so.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and I think just to add on to that sort of that fast innovation cycle idea, I mean, I think from a startup perspective as well, that's really important to a business that's trying to get off the ground, trying to get sort of that MVP out the door. And so by being able to build on top of existing open source technology and even open sourcing some of your own technology and building a community around that kind of helps accelerate that development cycle within your startup to kind of get you off the ground and hit the ground running.
And ultimately, I think that it's about you as a startup or as any enterprise, you want to concentrate on what makes your business special. You don't really want to have to spend a lot of time thinking about all of the stuff that sits underneath that.
Right.
Your special sauce is the layer on the top, and there's all these things underneath which you really don't want to have to be worrying about. But you might need to tweak and change in order to fix fit your model. So being able to do this with open source and have a whole community supporting you just allows you to be much more effective in your business.
Great, thank you. So we're going to I just really want to make this session very more interactive. So can we take some questions from the audience? So raise your hand if you have a question. Our volunteer will be coming to you. So yeah, go ahead.
Oh.
I think microphone is not working maybe, right? Say something.
Hello.
There we go.
There we go. Hi, everyone. I'm Sunzeni. I work for an engineering consulting company. We're based in Vancouver, in Canada. We work with startups that are innovating within the wearables and Internet of Things space. And a common question that we are asked is how startups can monetize technology that is open source. Because that's usually not a sexy business for investors.
So yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I think that there's two questions there. When you're building a thing, like an Internet of Things thing, your value proposition is in the thing, and if that contains open source, do you want to spend your life trying to monetize the product, or do you want to try and monetize the software stack underneath? So I think that part of it is that you have to work out what your value proposition is and monetize your value proposition. If you're in the software space, you can still make money with an open source product because in many respects, if you look at where big software companies' revenue streams come from, often it's the support, it's the service, it's the maintenance that are actually the revenue generators. And if you've got a community around you helping you build the software, that gives you more time for you to monetize the service and the support. So if you look at the very successful open source companies, they tend to be making their revenue streams actually from those support and service and building on top of the software rather than just trying to monetize the actual software itself.
Yeah, and I'd also just add a little bit. What I've seen a lot of startups doing when they open source their software is they monetize the pieces like you kind of said, the special sauce on top. But when they're building, say, an application or a bot or whatever that they're trying to monetize, a lot of times they find themselves building all these infrastructural pieces within their application that they don't actually. It doesn't matter who's working on it, who owns it. And so by open sourcing that, they improve that piece of their application and can focus on the piece that they're actually selling.
Okay, thank you. So I think we can probably take one more question. So please.
Hello, my name is Alex, and I'm a solutions architect for one of the companies in the Valley. So my question is, and I think it was from the start of the open source community, that as more we progress into the future and we see more companies adopt more open source dependencies in their stack, and there's official statistics between 35 to 40 open source components in each of software products. And how do open source foundations attack the problem of security of those elements? And this is in the line of your work, actually. Do you make some ratings or committees to actually evaluate each of these open source projects? Because it's starting to be a big problem in the industry, and we can see a couple of companies emerge that will try to figure out if there's any flaws. So.
Yeah. So, I mean, absolutely, security is critical no matter who writes the software. There's actually a lot of evidence to suggest that in many ways open source is often more secure than closed source because you can easily have more people doing analysis at a deeper level on open source software than trying to evaluate a black box of closed source software. One of the things that I've done at the Core Infrastructure Initiative, which is one of the Linux Foundation's projects, is we've created this platform for open source projects to evaluate themselves against a whole stack of practices that we know improve the quality outcomes of software development process. So it's actually called the best practice badge. I slightly object to the term best practice because it sort of implies that there is no better practice. But it's a set of good practices which you can evaluate. it is a checklist, but it's surprising how many projects don't do all of these things in the checklist simply because either they forgot or they didn't realize that it was important.
Yeah.
So we've got nearly 1,000 projects signed up for this best practice badge program. It is not just some rubber stamp. Only about 10% of the people who've signed up so far have actually got a badge. Most of them are still working towards that, and they're improving their development processes with a whole stack of security practices that we know will improve their outcomes. And this is really moving the needle in terms of the way that we develop open source software to be much more like the highest quality professional software engineers in high security organizations. And so I think that's really one of the things that we've done most at the Linux Foundation to try and improve that security and resilience of those projects so that they can really be enterprise grade.
Nico?
Yep.
Anything to
I
add?
think he covered it.
Great. All right. Thank you very much. So this is my question.
Yeah.
So yes. So many the blockchain is a very it's getting very, very popular right now,
Yeah.
actually. So kind of the decentralized technology is currently very emerging, right?
Yeah.
So do you think any good impact? I mean, the concept of open source can give a great or positive impact on the kind of further development of the blockchain or so kind of decentralized, less authority-dependent technology or solution kind of things. So what do you think?
30 seconds, go.
Okay. I think that clearly there is a synergy between the decentralized position of blockchain technologies and the much less centralized model of open source development. I'm not sure that there's much deeper than the fact that they're both very much community-driven, collaboration-driven, working together rather than having some central authority. And that's, I think it's a model for the future. We know that when we develop software together as a community, we get faster development and faster innovation. It's the way of the future.
Yeah. Very quickly, Nico.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say just to wrap it up. I mean, engage in the community. So that's the best way to get the most out of open source is to actually participate in the community, report bugs, send in fixes. It'll benefit your business as much as it benefits others.
Yeah. And I think it's important to understand that if you're a consumer of open source, be a supporter of open source. You don't have to be a coder to contribute. You can contribute in so many ways.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we are running out of the time. So this concludes this session. So please give a round of applause to the awesome people. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.